Thank you very much, Mr. Salau. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome once again to another session. And so that we don't waste time, I'll be proceeding straight ahead. So I'll be speaking to us today about the key participants in the Nigerian fintech ecosystem. And just before we continue, I'm just bringing our minds back to Mr. Salau's session yesterday, where he spoke about the fintech segment in Nigeria. If you recall, he had mentioned that we have the payments, we have the cryptocurrency, we have the insurtech, we have the lending, as well as the enterprise and infrastructure. So because we have such a magnitude of players in general in the fintech space in Nigeria, my presentation will be focused specifically on the payment system because it makes the bulk. As of the last time we checked, it accounts for about 38% of the Nigerian fintech ecospace as a whole. So my presentation will be specifically on the participants in the Nigerian fintech ecosystem payments. Okay, so I'll be taking us through the key stakeholders in the payment system, like I said, applicable laws, just high level, and we'll be dealing with each of the participants specifically, and they include the payment terminal service providers, payment solution service providers, agent banking, the switching, the mobile money operators, payment service banks, and the international money transfer service operators. All right, so the key participants in the payments ecosystem, we'll be taking a deep dive into each of them in subsequent slides, but high level, we have the payment terminal service providers, which are the PTSPs. We have the agent banks. We have the switch companies. We have the payment solution service providers, PSSPs. We have the mobile money operators, the MMOs, and we have the international money transfer service operators, IMTSO. So I know that Babajimi had spoken extensively yesterday on the key regulations and guidelines in the fintech space, but I just thought that it would be important to highlight specific ones that apply to the payment systems. Well, the CBN is the apex regulator when it comes to payments in Nigeria, and each of the participants in the payment system will have guidelines that are specific to them or guidelines that encompass and include them. So for the PTSPs, we have the CBN guidelines on operation of electronic payments in Nigeria, CBN guidelines on point of sale, but PSSPs also guidelines on regulation of agents banking, electronic payments, etc. I believe that when we share the slides, you have more, the slides will give you more information on some of the specific regulation. One important one to note is the CBN license categorization on payment systems in Nigeria. What it did was harmonized or sought to harmonize sought to categorize the players in the payment system. So dividing them into MMOs, the payment service and payment service providers. It's important to also mention that license categorization guideline because it makes a key provision, that will be important to note, which is that I know that I've listed out some of the players which you can see on the screen, but a company can also carry on any of these businesses or any of these items individually or collectively. So we can have a company as well as agent banking. But one important thing to note is to carry out an MMO function as well as a switching function. Then the CBN mandates that company would be required to incorporate a holding company with each of with two subsidiaries to individually carry out either a switching or an MMO. So no organization can carry both of them out at the same time. It's very important to note that. So taking a deep dive into each of the participants now and starting with the payment terminal service providers, PTSPs. So what are PTSPs? I am aware that some of these terminologies may fly over our head because they are very technical, but I'll try my best to simplify them and make them as elementary as possible, because the truth is, these are things that we interact with daily. We just might not know what the terms are, but these are things we interact with daily. For PTSPs, it's important to even understand what a payment terminal is. And simply put, on a more popular parlance, it is called POS terminals. And I'm sure that, every one of us maybe in our day-to-day activities has had to interact with POS terminals. Maybe when you go to the supermarket to make payment, or when you need to use maybe one of the agents beside your house to withdraw money. So everyone, that thing or that device that you see them holding is called the POS terminals. And these POS terminals are being maintained and being provided by certain participants in the payment systems known as the PTSPs. It's important to note that a license, an entity carrying on activity as a PTSP must be licensed by the CBN. So a PTSP is charged with the responsibility of ensuring the effectiveness of POS operations, and also providing support and maintenance. Some of the popular players you might see: Global Accelerex, MoneyPoint, Interfill, G3 Pay. So one thing I want us to take when we are leaving today's session is, the next time you walk into a supermarket and you try to make payments, just because a lot of the participants have their names on the terminals. So if you just, consciously just check, so oh, maybe this supermarket is using Global Accelerex, or this supermarket is using maybe FIDIC or Interfill. All right. So it's important to also know that PTSPs are an integral part of the payment ecosystem. And, after highlighting some of their use cases, it goes without saying. And some of the things, or some of the usefulness of PTSP, is deploying the POS terminals, maintaining and supporting and providing support to acquirers, monitoring and managing acceptance of devices at the POS locations, ensuring effectiveness of POS operations at merchant locations, and providing trainings to merchants. So in the next slide, I'll just be high level talking about some of the key terminologies or some of the relevant stakeholders, because I'll be using some of them in subsequent slides, and it's important for us to have an idea of who they are and what they do. So in the previous slide, I had mentioned something called an acquirer. And again, please don't let the words or whatever you see on the slides, puts you off. These things are things that we know them, we interact with them daily, even without, or subconsciously, unconsciously. So the first one is the merchant acquirer, or you can call them the acquiring bank. And they're simply the banks that, okay, let me start from the merchant, because we need to know where merchant is before you even know who the merchant acquirer is. And the merchant, simply put, all the supermarkets. So your ShopRite is a merchant, your Spar is a merchant, and any store you walk into, really, where you use a POS terminal, that particular entity or organization, in this case, is a merchant, simply put. And merchant acquirer, they are CBN licensed institutions. Typically, they are banks. So they are the banks that these merchants bank with. Card schemes, again, don't let the terminologies scare you. Your card schemes, if I give you an example, you really be able to interact with them. They're really your Visa, your MasterCard, your Verve, American Express. These are so they work. They work in partnership with banks to really facilitate the payment. So the truth is, what we see is the POS terminals, but a lot of things go A lot of things go on behind closed doors that we don't know about, and all these people interact to make your payment possible. So every time you walk into a store and you use your card to make payment, it's because of all these players in the industry. The card holder is you and I. We all, well, many of us own, the ATM cards that we use to make payments. So we're just the card holders. The card issuer are your banks. The banks are issued cards, your GT Bank, your First Bank, and the likes. Then we also have the switches, which we will deal with in the subsequent slides. And we have the PTSPs, which are the people that really, or which are the organizations that really provide the POS terminals. So because a PTSP is a licensed entity, they have certain obligations they're supposed to adhere to, certain reporting obligations to the CBN, and even money laundering. If you recall our session on money laundering yesterday, some of the things that were discussed are also applicable to PTSPs and the players in the payment industries. Sorry, I could see some people raising their hands. So some of the things that you need to do include, must ensure that the card holders are treated fairly. They must report all suspicious transactions to the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit. They must, ensure that they must implement frameworks to prevent the use of their networks for money laundering activities, etc. So to be honest, most of this regulatory, most of these compliance provisions really apply across board. So it will apply to almost all the participants. So having dealt with PTSPs, we move on to the PSSPs. And PSSPs, again, key, they are licensed by the CBN. It is important that they are licensed by the CBN. And what they do is they provide payment processing gateways and portals. So in a more simpler way of explaining, really, they are the interface between the customers and the banks, right? They are the ones that make sure that they're the ones that facilitate ease of your payments. They work back end, and some of the big players at Flutterwave or Paystack, if you know, in your day-to-day interactions, you realize that when you want to buy stuff online, if you're maybe through e-commerce, Jumia, or any online platform, and you click or you want to pay, more often than not, they'll redirect you to, maybe a Paystack or a Flutterwave interface that now asks you for certain information, and by the time you log in your information, all you know is that once there's money in your account, it shows there's money. They'll tell you, oh, successful. There's no money in your account. They'll come back and tell you insufficient balance. So they help to validate some of the information that you and I provide. They check if you have money in your account. So don't be fooled to think that when you put in your details, your bank is the one that tells you that, oh, there's no money. No, the PSSPs are the ones that facilitate that communication. They also help with deducting funds, transferring of funds. So they are one of the key players in the payments ecosystem. So there are certain things they can do, and which we call their permissible activities, and they include maintaining payment processing gateways and portals, payment solution and application development, payment processing. Those are some of the things that they do. And I've mentioned some of the big names. We have eSettlement, Ayowo, Flutterwave, GPay, Paystack. They also have certain obligations because they are a regulated entity. And some of the obligations that the PTSPs are supposed to adhere to are also applicable to PSSPs. And just to mention a few, they're required to verify the identity of customers. Let me see, they are required to identify your identity and my identity when we are trying to make payment or purchase things online. They also have certain KYC, know your customer processes. So you put in your name, your email address, your account details So they are supposed to, like, it's a requirement by the law. They are also supposed to take measures to prevent their platforms from being used for money laundering activities. And they also have certain reporting obligations to the CBN. So moving on to the agent banking. Before I go into my slides, if I go into the next slides, agent banking is, I think, if I do say so myself, I think almost everyone in today's training will know or has had a reason to interact with, agent banking. So, all those people that when you need to withdraw money and you don't want to go and queue at the ATM, and you just see some people beside your house, some of them own is, kiosk, and they're carrying their POS terminals, and you go there and you give them your card and you're able to withdraw, you're able to make transfer. That's really what agency banking is. So it's really providing limited banking services to customers through the use of agents, simply put. So you find out that your agents are able to do certain things that your traditional bank can do, but not all, because their powers are restricted. So some of the permissible activities for agent banks include cash deposits, withdrawals, bills payments, payments of salaries, and things like that. But they are also prohibited from carrying out certain transactions. And it's very important that we understand, or that we have at the back of our minds, some of these prohibited activities. And some of them include, opening accounts. You can't walk up to the agent beside your house to say, I want to open a bank account. I don't think, well, personally, I've not had to do that, and I've not seen any agent representing me that he or she can do that. So they cannot open bank accounts as of now. They can't give guarantees. They can't, they can't even operate where there's a communication failure with the financial institution they are representing. I don't know if you had a situation where you've gone out, tell you, oh, no network. If there's no network, nothing can happen. They can't really function. So there has to be some sort of communication between them and the financial institution they are representing. In Nigeria, as of today, we have three different agency banking structure, and that's the super agent, the sole agent, and the sub agent. Again, these are really elementary terms, don't let them confuse you. The super agents are really agents, right? Some of the agents we explained earlier that interface directly with the financial institutions or mobile money operators. So for instance, let me use myself as an example. I can be a super agent. All I need to do is, interface with a financial institution or an MMO to say, oh, I want to be an agent. But there's a possibility that I may not be able to undertake that agency banking by myself. So I will need to now further contract to people called sub-agents. So I will be like I will be the one on top, and I'll have the sub-agents that will now carry out the transaction or the agency banking transactions, but they'll be reporting directly to me. And that is what makes me a super agent. So, and I've mentioned the sub-agents, they're answerable to the super agents, right? So they're sub, just as the name implies, just, a subset of another. Then sole agents. So in this case, when I mentioned earlier that I myself can go to a bank and say, oh, I want to be the agent. It's not in all cases that, an agent will have a sub-agent. So in the situation where the agent is working on his own without subsidiaries, he'll be deemed as a sole agent. And some of the examples that we have here, a lot, this list is not in any way exhaustive. We have the First Money, iTex, and a host of others. Again, there are certain regulations or regulatory considerations that an entity carrying out agency banking must be aware of and must also adhere to. And one of the CBN requirements is that an agent shall have signs that are clearly visible. So Well, personally, I know that when I go to use some of these agents, it's clear. I can always see, oh, this is an agent. This is sometimes even the bank you represent. So if it's first money, it's clear. And that's because, it's a mandatory requirement of the law that they should have certain things, the name of the institution they are working with, a notice to the effect that the services shall be provided subject to availability of funds, etc., etc. Okay, now we'll move to the switch. I don't know if you recall when I was speaking about key participants in the PTSPs, or key players in the PTSPs, and I'd mentioned switch. Something I also forgot to mention was that those participants in the PTSPs can also, or are really or almost also the same for PSSPs, really. Are almost the same for PSSPs. So, and that's why, I'll keep mentioning things like merchants and the rest, because they are all playing in the same ecosystem. There needs to be a synergy between every one of them in the ecosystem. So for switch, again, it can be as elementary as possible. Forget all the jargons that might be here. What a switching company does simply, or in trying to explain in the most basic way, is, every one of us, we all use different kinds of cards. As card issuers, we all use different kind of cards and card schemes. Some of us use Visa, MasterCard. And the thing is, I don't think you ever walk into a supermarket and they ask you, oh, what card are you using? Verve or MasterCard? And if you say MasterCard, they'll say, oh yeah, no, go to line 1. If it's Verve, go to line 2. The reason why they don't have to do that, and why one POS terminal can accept different kinds of card is because of the switching company. So when you log in your details, whether you're using a Verve, whether you're using a MasterCard, whether you're using American Express, when you put in the details on your terminal, or it could also be via online, making an online transaction, right? The switch company is the one that, it's the brain that says, okay, oh, this person is imputing a Verve card. So it gives the order to Verve, or it says, oh, this person is imputing a MasterCard. So it sorts things out, really. That's what it does. It sorts things out. So that's why you can use any card when you're trying to pay online. You can use any card when you're trying to use a POS. The switching company, or the switch, is now what redirects and knows where each instruction is supposed to go to. That's really what they do in simpler term. So they really they facilitate communication really between different payment service providers, and they work like a centralized system for payment processing, if you recall what I said. So, everything goes to them, everything is routed to them, and they do sort out. So the main function of Switch is to facilitate real-time payment processing between providers, accept payment requests, choose the provider it needs to route the transaction to. So when you put a Verve card, it knows, okay, this transaction is supposed to be routed through Verve. When you put a MasterCard, oh, this transaction is supposed to be routed through MasterCard, and etc., etc. Some of the popular ones or switching companies that we know are eTransact, InterSwitch, and ARCA Networks Limited. Just to mention some things here too, they enabled an extension of payment network. So even if more payment networks come, even if by tomorrow we have more card schemes, right? For instance, we don't, the company that will go and create a special POS or reconstruct their payment process just to accommodate a new entrant, because the switching company just has the knowledge to know how to sort some of these things out. Again, just like every regulated entity, they have certain regulations and compliance obligations, and they have certain
I think, yes, I think we may have lost Kofo for a moment. I think she's trying to log back in. Please, let's just give her a minute. Let's see. Let's see. Hello, Kofo, are you there? Gentlemen, please, let's just bear with Kofo for a minute. I think she may have lost her connection. Please, let's just give her a minute or two. Thank you.
My sincere apologies. I got logged out. Please let me know at what point you stop hearing, so I'll just backtrack.
I think if you go back over the last 2-3 minutes, I think that might be your screen. So
okay, all right, just a minute.
Thank you.
Confirming that you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can, Kofo. Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I got this. Go back to some of the regulatory obligations of the switching company, and I said that, you know, just like every CBN licensed entity, switching companies also have obligations and compliance obligations, which includes, you know, making periodic reports to the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit on maybe suspicious transactions. They also have reporting obligations of fraud to the CBN. They have data protection obligations, etc. And I mentioned that it's important to note that these obligations are not exhaustive in any way, and they have other obligations as well. So we're moving now to the MMO, which is the mobile money operators. I recall that during Mr. Salau's section yesterday, yesterday, he tried to, you know, distinguish between, or he had mentioned something on mobile money when he was talking about digital money and the likes. And mobile money is really a technology that allows people receive, store, and spend money using a mobile phone. It means that it is money transferred electronically using mobile networks and SIM-enabled devices, primarily mobile phones, right? I don't know about you, but I have a mobile money wallet, and you know, some of our financial institutions also have that functionality. So if someone wants to send me money today, I don't need to give them my account number. If they have my mobile number, I can receive money. This is something that the mobile money ecosystem has allowed, or has made possible in Nigeria. So the mobile money is deployed by a mobile money operator, really, and they deploy financial services through mobile phones and mobile telephone networks. I don't know if you recall when Babajimi was speaking about regulators yesterday, and he had mentioned the NCC, and he just, you know, he had to reiterate why he was mentioning the NCC. That's the Nigerian Communications Commission. And, you know, we can appreciate why they are one of the regulators, especially because we're speaking about mobile monies and the rest. So in Nigeria, mobile money operators can offer the plethora of services, really, including but not limited to bills payment, funds transfer, ATM purchases, quick loans, even betting and online shopping, interestingly. In Nigeria, we have two regimes for mobile money operations, and we have the bank-led and the non-bank-led. It's important to note that as at date in Nigeria, telecommunication companies are prohibited from providing mobile money operations. I thought it important to mention because I know that some people, not, I trust that none of them is here, but some people have the misguided notion that the license granted to the likes of MTN and Airtel was the mobile money license, and that is not it. We'll speak to the license that they have in subsequent slides. But it's also important to just mention that in some other jurisdictions, maybe like Ghana, Kenya, they have telecommunications-led mobile money operations. But as at date in Nigeria, that is not the case. Again, just like all the participants I have spoken to earlier, an MMO must obtain the license of the CBN to operate. So what's the bank-led model, the non-bank-led model? Simply, bank-led model is where your bank is the one providing the mobile money. We are the lead initiators. And the non-bank model is where corporate organizations that are not banking institutions provide mobile money. So you don't have to be a bank to be able to be licensed as a mobile money operator. And some of the, almost all the banks in Nigeria really come under the bank-led. And for the non-bank-led, we have, big players like Paga, eTransact, Fintech wallets, and there are more than this. This is just some of the examples of the people offering mobile money, of the organizations offering mobile money in Nigeria today. It's also important to speak to some of the relevant stakeholders in the mobile money system. We have the banks, like we already said, in a situation where it is a bank-led model. We have the banks, we have the customers, you and I. Just to say that you and I are very, very important in the payment ecosystem. Without customers like us, a lot of these companies cannot fly. They can't even exist. So we are one of the most important, if not the most important people in the payment ecosystem. That's something to be proud about. Mobile money operators, yes. So these are the licensed. They provide a telecommunication network infrastructure to use mobile money. Then we also have the infrastructure providers. So they are also very important because they are the ones that make sure that certain infrastructures are in place for us to be able to interact with mobile money. And the licensed corporate organizations, those are the ones that deal with this is the situation where it's a non-bank-led model. So these are just some of the stakeholders in the mobile money system. Now, payment service banks. If you recall in the previous slides, I said that the likes of MTN and Airtel and even Nine Mobile, like there's a misguided notion that they have MMO license, which is wrong. What they have is payment service banking license. So there's a clear distinction between both of them. So what's a payment service bank, right? This is a new category. It was recently, introduced by the CBN. They operate like your traditional bank, but on a smaller scale. And they also have some things or there's some activities that they are prohibited from doing, which a traditional bank would ordinarily be able to do, but they are able to do a lot of things, to be honest, just with limited functionality. And some of the people, or some of the eligible promoters, so by eligible promoters, some of the people that are eligible to apply for a payment service banking license. And we have banking agents, telecommunications company, like I said, your MTN, your Airtel, retail chains, switching companies, postal service providers, MMOs, switches, and other fintechs that do not come under any of the aforementioned. Examples of some of the payment service banks we have in Nigeria: MTN Mobile Money, Nine Payment Service Bank, Money Master, Airtel Payment Service Bank as well. So it's really important to know what they can do and what they cannot do. Like I said, they are more of a so they are more like a watered down bank. And one of the goals for Payment Service Bank is really so that they are able to serve the excluded and the marginalized population. I know that some of us, we keep hearing something called banking the unbanked, right? And this is one of, so by introducing the Payment Service Bank, that's one of the ways that the CBN has been trying to reach the marginalized population in Nigeria. So some of the things they can do include rendering financial advisory services, accepting deposits from individuals and small businesses. They can sell foreign currencies, when you have, like when you collect money, when you receive money, when you're sending out money, they can do that. They can invest in federal government bonds and securities. They can carry out payments. They can operate electronic wallets. They can issue debit cards. So you can see that they are doing practically what your average bank does. But the difference now is in the non-permissible activity, which is something that your traditional bank would be able to do. So they cannot, deal in a foreign exchange market. So I know I'd said that they can sell foreign currencies, but they can, so you need to note the difference. So what they can do is they can sell foreign currencies realized from receiving money, right? Receiving money, but they can't deal with it. So you can't go to them and say, oh, you want to buy dollars, or like you would do in a traditional bank. You can't go to them and make payments in dollars, right? But they can sell. So when someone sends money from abroad and it links to them, they can sell that kind of foreign exchange. They can't do your insurance underwriting. They can't grant any form of loans, advances, and guarantees. So you can't go to a payment service bank today and say that you want to obtain a loan. They are prohibited. So if you have anybody, any institution that is not a bank, that for a fact is not a licensed deposit money taking bank in Nigeria, that represents to you that they are a PSB and they want to give you a loan, that should be a red flag. They can't establish any subsidiary, but there is a caveat, except as prescribed by the CBN on the scope of banking and ancillary matters. And again, they can also undertake any transaction or activity that has not been expressly stated in the guidelines or in the guidelines issued by CBN today or in the future. They also have, some regulatory compliance, again, because they are licensed by the CBN. They are required to maintain an unpaired minimum capital of 5 billion naira. So that's another key distinction. That for banks it's higher, but for PSB, that's PSB, it's lesser, it's 5 billion. They're supposed to comply with the Anti-Money Laundering, now the Anti-Money Laundering Prohibition Act of 2022, and some other anti-money laundering regulations issued by CBN from time to time, as well as the 2019 Amendment 1. They're supposed to render quarterly returns, and they also interface with NIBs. And this is just high level, some of the things that some of their regulatory compliance obligations. It could be more, or they are more. So we're moving now from the payment service banks to the international money transfer service operations. And I was, some of the names that are very popular: Western Union, MoneyGram, RIA, and a lot of them are even springing up these days. Like, I can't even keep up with personally. So really, what is international money transfer? So I'm not going to bore us with the definition that I have, there, but it just simply means transfer of funds from individuals living abroad to individuals living in Nigeria and vice versa. So when you receive money from your friends or your family members abroad, and when you send money to your friends and to your family members abroad, there's something that is very important to note, that currently under the international money transfer regime in Nigeria, and the ones that come under the international money transfer that are licensed, or some of the activities that international money transfer operators can do, it's important to note that one key thing is P2P. So a situation where, when I was trying to explain what international money transfer is in relation to the law, I had said receiving money from your friends and families abroad, and you as an individual sending money to your friends and families abroad. These do not apply in a situation where it's a company that is sending money, right? Or you're sending money to a company. They are not covered under this. So the IMTSO regime in Nigeria envisages two licensing regimes. So we have the IMTSOs incorporated abroad, and they're called the international IMTSOs. So Western Union, MoneyGram, they're international IMTSOs, and we have the Nigerian-based, those are indigenous IMTSOs. It's important to note that an approved international IMTSO is permitted to carry out IMTS operations in Nigeria, subject to the fulfillment using local agents, right? But subject to the fulfillment of certain things or certain obligations in the IMTSO guidelines. So you would appreciate why it is important for us to speak about some of the specific guidelines that applies to participants when we started our discourse. Then again, a situation where an indigenous IMTSO is desirous of providing IMTSO services on a global scale, they are permitted to do so, but they are required to engage a foreign technical partner licensed by the CBN as well. Okay, so some of the permissible activities of IMTSO includes cross-border personal money transfer services, such as money that you transfer towards family maintenance, when you want to travel or to pay foreign tourists, monies for the purpose of transmitting them person to person. And again, like I said, the target is individuals, not corporates. Non-permissible activities for IMTSO, they are not allowed under any circumstance, to deal with gold or precious materials. They are not allowed to, engage in deposit taking. They can't take money or lend money. They can't maintain current accounts on behalf of their customers. They can establish letters of credit. They can act as custodians of funds on behalf of customers. And this is just among there are a lot of other things, and it's important to consult the regulations when you need to maybe advise your client or just for more information. Something I didn't mention is that recently, I think in 2020, the CBN issued a guideline that mandates IMTSOs receiving dollars from abroad to remit such monies in dollars. So what was obtainable before that regulation was that if your friend sends you dollars from abroad, you can get the Naira equivalent through Western Union or MoneyGram. But now the CBN insists, because of scarcity of forex and all of that, when they send you money in dollars, that money should be received in dollars or in whatever currency they say. So it could be pounds.
It seems we may have lost Kofo's connection again. Kofo, I see you're still online. Are you there? Oh, she's dropped off now. Kofo?
Yeah.
If you can hear us, I think your connection. Okay, I think your connection is a bit unstable. And also you're running behind time, so perhaps maybe just use the next 5 minutes to try to round off. All right, I'll hand it back to you. Please go ahead, Kofo.
Okay,
please go ahead, Kofo. Go ahead. Kofo, can you hear me? Yeah, I think. Kofo, can you hear me?
Really, I think I was on the last slide already.
Okay.
So I'll switch off my video just so that you know.
That's fine.
Yeah, so I said that I was already rounding off. I got on my last slide. Yes. So this is the last slide. So just like I said, these are some of the key regulations and compliance obligations for IMTSO as well. In the interest of time, I can't speak to them individually. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Hello.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Kofo. Thank you very much for that very interactive session. Thank you for taking us through the different stakeholders, or what perhaps we could call participants in the fintech ecosystem in Nigeria. We have learned about PSSPs, switches, PTSPs, agents, and IMs. We've learned about their permissible activities and their non-permitted activities. Thank you very, very much for that. I think we have a few minutes that we can take ahead of schedule, so we can take some of the questions in the questions in the Q&A room. So Kofo, if you could please just go to the Q&A room. There are some questions there for you. Let's see if we can identify them.
Okay, I can see it. I don't know if you can hear me.
Okay, please go ahead. Please go ahead, Kofo. I think we have time for about 12 minutes, so please go ahead.
Okay. So there were some questions before I dropped off, but when I dropped off, I couldn't see them anymore. So someone says that, why does MTN use the phrase mobile money? I'm not sure. Maybe if you have something to show us to say that, oh, MTN uses mobile. I'm not sure. I don't think that's correct. But I'm not sure. So a question here, in agent banking using POS, how can a fraudulent transaction be traced, and who is the major actor to achieving this? Example, a transaction using your ATM without permission. Okay, that's a good question. Something I might have not mentioned when I was speaking about some of the participants earlier, specifically the PSSP, is that one of the other things they do is they are also responsible for checking the authenticity of your card. They are responsible for also security checking. So they will be the one. Okay, so now, so that's for the PSSP, but you're asking in agent banking. So I think it's still the same. The PSSPs also, they're also players in agent banking. Maybe I didn't mention that as well. So the role is also the same. They are the ones that will also be responsible for tracing and doing those things as well. Question is there specific internal and external audit framework for PSSP? So what do you mean? That question is not clear when you say specific internal, but I'm sure if you check the CBN or the relevant CBN guidelines in relation to PSSPs, it should include information or certain things on external and internal and external audit framework. Okay. So the requirements for registration of a PSSP, you should find that in the CBN circular. So there's some CBN circulars that speak to it. I mentioned the new license categorization. It includes information on the registration requirements, including the shareholding, minimum paid up capital, and some other information. So if you just look at that, you have more information. Okay, I'm trying to see. I know that I don't have more time anymore. What's your opinion? So Kenichukwu, what's your opinion on directive of CBN to commercial banks to receive IMT in foreign currency? So I know that I mentioned that earlier, and I said that one of the reasons why they had issued that directive was to also increase the circulation of dollars in the market. Whether or not is a way of encouraging black market operations, I cannot answer that. Okay. Is there a standalone regulation for PSSP? let me just, I don't know if my slides are still showing. So that, okay, they're still showing. Let me go to the slides on the regulations real quick, just so that when we leave here, so there is no, like I said, there is really no harmonized regulations for all of this. Just give me a minute. So if you can see, let me increase, so if you see the slides, so for PSSPs, sorry, I'm trying to even see my own slides. Okay, but if you can look at it, so you can just, so PSSPs, there are certain regulations, so you can just take a look at it that applies to PSSP, but there is no standalone to answer your question. Any corporate governance framework that regulates, I would believe that is this, because they are institutions licensed by the CBN, so the general CBN Code of Corporate Governance will apply to PTSPs and PSSPs as well. If a client who lives abroad wants to do some projects in Nigeria, and to this end periodically sends money into my account, sometimes in millions, do I need to get licensed with IMTSO to receive such money? First of all, just to mention, I know we said that the IMTSO regulations will come in where the money you're sending, first of all, it's individual to individual for some specific purpose, including family maintenance, tourism. So it doesn't envisage, because what this appears to mean is it's what it appears to be is like, you're using the money for certain projects. Chances are that, so I do not think that, so first of all, you won't need to get an IMTSO license because you're not the one facilitating the transfer, right? Just to say that you're not the one dealing with the transfer. The transfer is made possible because there is an IMTSO or maybe a bank somewhere. But in this case, I don't think that the IMTSO regulations will apply. They are specific things. So maybe if you just go back to the IMTSO guidelines, they're specific permissible activities really, which are very, very, very specific. They're very, very specific. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to sift through all the questions. Pardon me if I miss your questions. There are a number. So Sunset, I mentioned that a non-banking institution cannot grant loan. How do we situate the loan apps, the corporate entities operating the local agile model who grant loans to customers? First of all, I'm going to ask, are they licensed? Right. And so for the loan apps, right? So again, I don't know if you recall from yesterday's session, I want to do a recap today. I have spoken that, the fintech ecosystem is not limited to payments. It also includes lending. So chances are that, these people that you're speaking about to fall under the lending category, which has its own ecosystem that's different from the payments. I hope that answers your question. So they might need certain licenses, they might need some things to do, but I didn't touch on that. So, but it's possible that they'll do some things to do. But for the local agile, I know most of them are not licensed, but if a company wants to carry on something like that kind of transaction, they might need some licenses, which I think, what's his name? Baba Jimmy spoke on something like this yesterday. So if you can refer to yesterday's session, I think it's available on YouTube, that might also help to shed light in relation to this lending bit of the question.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's okay.
Yeah, I think there are one or two. I think you've tried to answer most of the questions. I know they're still coming in, but we're coming up to the 4 o'clock, and I'm conscious we should turn over to David now. But I think just one general question I can add while you catch your breath. I could try to answer is how can a lawyer become a fintech practitioner? Do I have to go for some trainings? Most attendee anonymous. Really, it's just about reading and being part of fora like this, as I mentioned yesterday, upskill oneself. What we've tried to do over the last three days is to try and provide a high-level overview of most of the issues and important aspects of fintech in Nigeria, and hopefully if you attend more of these sort of sessions and you do a bit more reading, material will be shared, you'll be able to sort of get a bit more familiar with it. Then you can easily become a fintech practitioner. I will just, one more question before I turn over to the receiving in dollars, does it not water down the naira? That's by Minabo Beatrice. Minabo, I think you're referring to when Kofo explained the new CBN directive requiring IMTSOs, IMTSOs to pay out the receipts of revenue remittances, inbound remittances in USD. Previously, as Kofo explained, those remittances, even though dollars were foreign exchange was sent by a sender outside Nigeria, what some of the remittance companies really were doing was that they were paying out the naira equivalent of the amount remitted. And the CBN wasn't too happy about that development because it came at a time when the exchange rate stability was serious at the time, and there was a scarcity of dollars. I'm sure if you pick up the news, you know that Nigeria continues to suffer an FX liquidity squeeze. And so what the CBN tried to do by mandating remittance companies to pay out remittances in dollars was so that we could improve availability of dollars within the system, within the Nigerian economy, and that is actually what would have provided some stability for the naira rather than, because the less dollars were in circulation, the more pressure was on the naira to access those same dollars. I know we're straying out of law and into maybe FX policy, but I just wanted to answer that question. So please keep the questions coming in. I'm sure Kofo will try to answer them as much as possible. It is now 4 p.m. and so I'm going to, Kofo, if you could please stop sharing your slide. And if you could please stop sharing your slide so that we can call in and we can bring in Davidson. Davidson, hi, I know you're there. Davidson will be speaking to us on different aspects of data protection. And he'll be talking about, data protection, data privacy. He'll be distinguishing between both of those concepts, and he'll be looking in a lot more detail. We'll be doing a very deep dive into data protection applications of fintechs, what data privacy rules require, from a security point of view, data breach management point of view, and things of that nature. Davidson, as I mentioned, is a partner at Alex practitioners, and Davidson is one of the most respected practitioners when it comes to areas around fintech in Nigeria. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Davidson. Davidson, you're very welcome. Please take it away for the last and final session, or by no means the least session.
Yeah, thanks, Dami, and good afternoon, everyone. My fellow colleagues, friends out there. I stand and indeed sit on existing protocols. And thank you, Kofo, for such an amazing session. I'm sure that most of our colleagues would have gotten a few things from that session. So I'm going to be speaking on data protection for fintechs. And I would try as much as I can to move quickly on this. But I'll probably just, before moving forward, start with a few short stories. One of my favorites is about a store, a pregnant teenager, and an angry father. But first place to start with is, I'm sure most of us hear this statement a lot these days, where people say that data is the new oil. And some people have asked me, what exactly does that mean? I mean, because I have data on my phone. Maybe I use 9 Mobile or MTN. So is that the data that is at stake? Are they trying to tell me that the data I'm using to make calls or to browse is now the new oil? No, that's not the sort of data that has been spoken about. So you need to be able to understand how data operates and why there's a very strong argument that it's the new oil. And I think maybe one way of even looking at it being the new oil is when you look at some of the companies now that use data, right, to run their businesses, and then you probably compare it with some oil companies. An example is Netflix, and I'll probably expatiate on the Netflix side. But during the pandemic, Netflix became more valuable than ExxonMobil in terms of its market capitalization. So again, you could probably say that data, which is used for streaming purposes in that sense, is now more valuable than oil. But the data that we speak about here is personal information, that concerns people. So let's look at the story of Target, right? Then I think that may shed some light on data, personal data, and how it works. Target is a US store. At one time was number 2 retail store in the US, billions of revenue. I believe they're still doing relatively well now, even though where there is a data breach, that can pretty much affect your valuation and the perception that people have about you. Now, Target stumbled on a few things concerning the use of data and how to manipulate it. And when I use the word manipulate, don't look at that in a negative sense. Of course, manipulate just means being able to use it for a particular purpose. So Target realized that as people came to buy from their store, they would require some information from you. If you've shopped with some of these retail stores like ShopRite, they give you loyalty cards and stuff like that, right? But for you to have those loyalty cards, certain information like your date of birth, your name, what you do for a living, they get all of that. That's data, that's personal data, So Target gets all of that information from you and stores it on their system. They now then start tracking your buying habits. Then, of course, you've consented to them being able to do that, but you've probably not given much thought to how they're using your data. So they now know when you come to the store to buy something and you check out, it reads and they see what you buy. They now had a team of, data analysts, who were now studying people's purchasing pattern. And so if every weekend you came and you bought pizza and maybe a 6-pack of beer, then they will know, okay, well, this person probably spends the weekend watching movies, because how are you going to get past your 6-pack of beer and all the pizza that you're buying? And so they will then be sending you coupons and stuff, emails, text messages that would let you know when the latest, orders were in town. If you were a lady that liked to shop and buy, really good bags, really good clothes, they would notice your purchasing habits. And so they would then start sending you, coupons and, stuff that would interest you. And you would quickly want to go and buy because maybe the latest Gucci is in town or something like that. And what this did for them was there was an upsurge in their sales. It skyrocketed with millions of, revenue coming in. And so they had stumbled on something. If you were a pregnant person, they may not know, but by the time you probably bought baby lotion, you bought a couple of things, and they will know, okay, maybe this person is pregnant, or this person probably has a couple of kids because the person is always buying diapers and all of that. And then they would give you discounts and stuff like that so that you will come back and buy more and have like this treasure trove and feel like you've really made a profit out of what you've bought. And well, people really didn't know this. It was one of the things that just brought it to awareness. And so a 16-year-old girl, went to Target, bought a couple of things, and Target, as usual, was tracking her purchasing habits. They now noticed that they didn't really check her age per se, but not like they really cared anyway, but they noticed that she was always buying, things that ladies that are preparing to deliver kids buy, some baby oil and a few things. And so they presumed, well, she's pregnant. So they started sending her, coupons and stuff for pregnancy and all of that. And then her father received one of those things because she's a minor, of course, she's still in college. So the father called and he was so upset and warned them that, why are you trying to get my daughter to start thinking about pregnancy? Don't you know she's only 16 years old? And so Target was like, oh, we're sorry. But it turned out a couple of weeks later that the father realized his daughter was actually pregnant. So Target actually found out before the father that the daughter was pregnant. And the father went to the press and, it now became a big story that, oh, well, this is what Target is actually doing. They are manipulating data for business purposes. And it was all fine and good. But a couple of years after that, there was a breach of Target's system. And I think maybe close to about 50 or so million people's credit card details were breached and leaked, and so that caused a major scandal. People sued Target. Target had to pay almost $20 million in compensation. But other than that, they lost over $500 million in revenue, because you see, when this kind of breaches happen, it does a couple of things to you, right? It makes you lose credibility. People probably just stop purchasing what you're selling, and there's just that general decline in perception of your activities. Another example, I'm sure that some of us heard about the Cambridge Analytica scandal along with Facebook. But what happened in that case really was that Cambridge Analytica, they were a company that was using big data analytics to do a lot of trackings. Turns out that they were involved in Brexit, but they were also involved in the election of Donald Trump. So what they basically did, and it was Donald Trump issue that actually broke their manipulation of data and how it worked, was they had a mobile app, and you would download the mobile app. It was supposed to help you carry out some psychological tests, right? So that you would just know your patterns on a few things like that. So they got about maybe like 500,000-600,000 people to sign up and download that app and use it. But what people who were using that app did not know was that as they were downloading it and giving their information, the app would probably request that you list about 5 or 6 of your contacts. People would do that, list contacts and all of that. But they were now, Cambridge Analytica was able to go to Facebook and take out those people's contacts, as well as the contacts of the people that, were their connections, and got about, I think it was about over 50 million US voters, or getting to like 60 million US voters were now had their data with Cambridge Analytica. And what Cambridge Analytica was then doing was sending them advertisements, sending them information that made it look as if the Democrats were the devil, So all the Hillary Trump, scandal around her emails and all of that, they heightened so much fear in the American people that voting for Donald Trump to save America was probably something that people just felt was the next best thing, which was a similar thing that they did with Brexit as well, because they were also used as an agency when the Brexit thing was going on. People who were in support of Brexit used them to manipulate data and make people feel that Brexit was what was important for them. And so it turned out that whole fear mongering and all of that actually tilted the scale in favor of Donald Trump, arguably so, and he was able to win the 2016 elections. One of the programmers that was involved in that actually blew the whistle in 2018, so people got to know. Facebook was fined maybe about $5 billion. Cambridge Analytica got bankrupt, of course, because it was a huge scandal. But again, it shows you how data can be manipulated and used in such a way that you can actually find out what's going on with people. Maybe the last example that I would give on data is where I started from, which deals with Netflix. Now, Netflix is a streaming platform, like some of us know. They probably have over 200 million subscribers now globally. What Netflix does is what a lot of us see happen to us every day, but we really don't pay much attention to it. We just take it for granted that, hey, these things happen. But what Netflix does is when you sign up to them, you give them information. Of course, you consent to a lot of things, and I'll come back to the issue of consent as I move along. You consent to the use of your data and all of that. And if you probably sign up for House of Cards, sign up to watch a couple of their programs, they will then study your watching pattern and see that you like to watch certain types of shows. Orange is the new black. Maybe they will decide to bring out one that is black is the new orange, but just something that would appeal to you. And you could just sit on your couch all day and just clicking from one to the next. You're binging. You're like, oh, wow, how did they know that I like this? Can you click on it? But they know you like that because they're using your data to determine your watching patterns. And of course, during the pandemic, when people had nowhere to go and there were lockdowns for so long, Netflix was the guilty pleasure that a lot of people dealt with. And Netflix valuation, they became more valuable than Disney. They became more valuable, like I mentioned, ExxonMobil and a couple of other companies. If you look at the top 10 most valuable companies globally, about 8 of them are manipulating data. And again, manipulation is not a bad word when you use it to describe data. How does it work, really? So I'm sure that some of us, maybe when we're trying to buy tickets, you go to Lufthansa or BA, you search for tickets, you find, you buy, you suddenly notice that you start receiving emails, you start receiving all manner of promotional things, maybe letting you know that tickets are available. Maybe you've not even bought, you're still trying to make up your mind, but suddenly you start getting inundated with a lot of emails and texts and things just letting you know that there are prizes to be won or there are opportunities to get cheap tickets. It's because when you went to those platforms, I'm sure that happens to us a lot of times, you go to platforms, before you can read the article very well or really access what's on the platform, it will request that you accept something or you consent to something. You just, what's your own? You don't even care to accept cookies, consent. You just click on it because you just want to read what's there or you just want to shop and buy what's there. But what you've consented to, and if you want, you can click on the terms and conditions and see. It may be like 3 or 4 pages. But if you read everything, you consent to a number of things. You consent to receiving marketing information. You consent to your data being used for particular purposes. Of course, you've done that. So that's why you would receive that information. But people have abused that. I remember years ago when people still used to do road travels or go to DSTV office to sign and pay. You suddenly realize maybe if you were traveling from Lagos to Ibadan and you wrote down your name, in their schedule, maybe like 1 week later, you get one call from somebody saying, Sule, don't you know me? He said, now we met. What those guys have just done is they've given your information to some people. People would use it. Also, if there was a political campaign like is going on now and elections are coming up, they will just sell your data, because they need as many numbers as possible. So they just give people your number and all of that. And all of these things that happened, particularly the Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal, led to an outcry globally. And people now realized, okay, well, it's time to actually start paying a lot of attention to issues of data protection and data privacy. Have such rules and regulations existed? Definitely they have, one way or the other. But people been able to really appreciate data and how it works, how people can make money out of it, and why it needs to be protected has now become heightened more than ever. And so as we even move into this season when a lot of people are going to be looking for information on you need to be aware of how data and big data analytics works. I remember there was one app that came out a while ago that you could use to make yourself look older. People were just downloading it and all of that, but you don't know what they're going to use your data for. So I'm not saying get paranoid about terms and conditions, but it's always good to know what the small print say. So having given that long intro, let's move into some of the things we'll be looking at. And I'll try not to keep it technical so that we can appreciate what it is. Meaning and importance of data protection and data privacy. We'll be looking at data privacy, security, and fintech, data protection laws and regulations in Nigeria, data protection obligations on Nigerian fintech companies, data protection documentation for fintech, and then we conclude and look at questions and answers. So data protection and privacy, people use the terms interchangeably, but there's actually a difference between data protection and data privacy, and we'll just be looking at that. Some of the examples that I've given us. So most times, once you set up your Google platform, for instance, just understand that there are always terms and conditions. Just understand that your data is always in danger, one way or the other, of being used. But let me just give the very simplified, the definition of personal data. Personal data is any information that can be used to identify you. So it could be your email, it could be your phone number, it could be your Instagram page, your LinkedIn, your Facebook, your ID card, that's national ID, your phone number, all of these things that can be used to identify you directly or indirectly are regarded as personal data. And bearing that in mind, you realize that as each day goes by, you are dropping pieces of personal data along the way. You're just moving along the way, man. From when you browse, personal data is being processed. You're buying a ticket, you go to Amazon. Personal data is being used for a lot of purposes. And so there will be that tendency for people to take your personal data and use it for a purpose different from what you agreed from. There are legal basis, of course, for using and processing personal data, and we'll be looking at that as well. And I explained here that data exchange, which is where data moves to and fro, has become an integrated part of commercial transactions, including fintechs, with data protection being a major risk issue, which most companies put into consideration before contracting with other companies and institutions. So governments of the world, of course, have risen to the task of protection of personal data and privacy. We had the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which was one of the first major data protection regulations that covered a wide number of countries, all the EU countries covered by GDPR. And GDPR used data privacy and data protection principles, global principles, of course, which are then adopted or applied and domesticated in different parts of the world. For instance, Nigeria that has the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation basically derived 95% of what is in there from the GDPR, which means that compliance with the GDPR takes you quite far with compliance with the NDPR. Now, data protection is the process of safeguarding data from manipulation, corruption, compromise, or loss. So, you have to protect, like you typically have to do, protect something from being used in a way or form or lost. How do you retrieve it? How do you process it? How do you delete it? And processing is a very wide word that covers most of these things. But data protection ensures that data is accessible for authorized purposes only and is processed in compliance with applicable legal and regulatory requirements. Some methods of data protection include encryption of data, backing up of data, anti-malware protection, amongst others. In the midst of all this, right, you have data. Processing it means that you're using it for a particular purpose. Of course, there are different bases for processing personal data. One of the most popular ones is consent, right? Where you consent to the use of your personal data. But you can also use personal data when it comes to furtherance of a contract, or also when it comes to where there's a legal obligation on you to actually process personal data. And some of what you can do to protect personal data is you can encrypt the data, right, thereby making it difficult for it to be hacked. And there are a couple of ways of doing this by two-tiered authentications, different ways. You can back up the personal data, maybe in the cloud, in different external devices, and then, also protect it by other ways, and also ensure that there's privacy. So data privacy is like a subset of data protection. Data protection is wide, but data privacy deals with, like everybody is entitled to privacy. I mean, the Constitution itself provides for that protection and privacy of our personal information. So data privacy is the aspect of data protection that deals with handling personal data. That is the collection, storage, retention, and destruction of personal data in compliance with data protection laws, regulations, and general privacy best practices. So just understand that data protection is wide, what you do to protect it. But data privacy is specific and deals with how you process it and how you deal with it, how you collect it, how you store it, how you retain it, and how you destroy it. So a couple of other things here, and I'll just read directly that data protection and privacy prevents the data of an institution or organization from being manipulated, hacked, all of that. So for an organization to ensure that it is carrying out best practices, it has to ensure the safety of its data. Going back to the Target story, it was later discovered that Target wasn't the one responsible for, it wasn't directly responsible for that data breach. It was one of his third-party, vendors, but those ones didn't really have good privacy policies in place, cybersecurity. So through that hack, and through the access from that third party, the Target systems were eventually, corrupted, and then that breach took place. So you have to be sure that data is protected, that there's safety of personal data and even corporate data as well, and it can cause severe damage to an institution's operation and goodwill. Probably have a number of these examples. Yahoo is another example. I mean, I don't know how many of us still use Yahoo emails, but once upon a time, and I don't know whether Gen Z, I'm sure they probably don't just use Yahoo, but once upon a time, Yahoo was like the go-to email address, and that's where the term Yahoo boys came from, because they were probably the only ones who were able to access computers then. I mean, you go to cyber cafe and do all of that, but Yahoo emails, before Hotmail and the others came, Yahoo was so popular that if you were opening an email account, it would be a Yahoo email. And because it was only perceived that people who would always be on the internet, I mean, not like now where we all have to be there. At that time, there were very few, so they became Yahoo boys because they were always on the internet. But Yahoo was very popular, and they were in the middle of an acquisition. Verizon was looking to buy them. I think that was in 2016 or thereabouts. We need to buy them for billions of dollars. But it now turned out that there was actually a data that mine was probably compromised. But what do I care? Not like I have a lot going on in my Yahoo email. But what that did was it affected the credibility of Yahoo and also affected their valuation because Verizon was willing to pay much less than what they had initially agreed for. So again, shows you the importance of data protection, data privacy. But I'll just move on from here and give less examples. So data protection has referenced that data exchange has also become a significant part of the Nigerian government has taken steps towards the protection of personal data, which is, of course, recognized under Section 37 of the Constitution, which basically provides that the correspondence, telephone conversations, and other, private, discussions that take place are protected. So that the constitutional provision was what for a long time we were using in Nigeria for data protection and data privacy, but things are about to expand beyond that. Now, because of how fintechs are, they're very agile. During the pandemic, for instance, fintechs and e-commerce platforms, there was a lot of acceleration in their growth as people moved around less. If you wanted to bank, the traditional banks like GT, Access, and the rest of them, they have their mobile apps, so you can carry out mobile banking, you can carry out internet banking. But these digital banks, on neobanks, you can just they are digital in every sense of the word. So you can bank with them without having to ever step into a banking hall. So for a Kuda bank account, for instance, I just go online, pop in like 10, 15 minutes, I've set up a bank account and I can start transacting my account. Contrast that with some traditional banks where they will send you plenty forms to fill. You fill, they'll now say, come for data capture, you go fingerprint. So fintechs, really got to do quite a bit during the pandemic and, with a lot of processing. So whether you were switching, you were a payment processor, you were a PTSP, you were a PSSP, some of the, fintech companies that Kofo referenced during our own presentation, you had to use a lot of data to do that. And so even for fintechs, I think more than any other banking and financial institutions, the use of personal data and the processing and the protection of it is very key and crucial. Because if there's any cybersecurity breach, it could actually be problematic. And of course, what people then do, which is why, again, it's important that you read the fine print. But again, don't get paranoid over it. You can't be reading all the fine print, trust me. I even hardly read all the fine print. If I'm downloading an app, I consent and I just download. If I'm going online, maybe because I'm presuming that whoever set up that privacy policy would have set it up the way that I would, which is to ensure that all the T's and I's are crossed and dotted. But people actually sell profiles. People sell personal data, and people target others based off. I think a couple of months ago, something broke that a few fintechs are actually in the business, tech companies generally are in the business of selling personal data, which wouldn't be legal if the other party didn't consent for the sale of, or transfer of their personal data. So it's important that if something happens, you actually go back to where all of that came from to sort of determine if you gave your data somewhere else. An example that happened to one of my clients as a cryptocurrency exchange. There was this guy, he's a general. He applied for a US visa. Maybe while doing that, you have a lot of sites that pop up. So you just click on something. It may not have been the authentic website, but he went there anyway, and then got information, and then applied for his visa finally, and all of that, and moved on from there. But for my client as a cryptocurrency exchange, one of the largest in Nigeria and even Africa, they're quite global. Somebody made a purchase with that guy's credit card. So I guess he probably went to a phishing platform, where they were able to clone a couple of things about him, And so even the KYC that my client did was probably not that detailed because, if somebody provides credit card details, the PIN and all of that, most times you presume that the person has done the right thing, but apparently it wasn't. And they used it to buy cryptocurrency and moved to China. But my client didn't know that until somebody went to an upper area court in Makurdi and froze my client's account. My client probably had hundreds of millions in their account. And when I eventually saw the upper area court judge, she was probably about maybe 26, 27. So in my mind, I was just trying to understand how you just freeze an account on something that you don't really understand. But of course, I think maybe about $1 million of the general had been hacked and stolen to buy cryptocurrency. My client wasn't the wiser about it, but that sort of use of his personal data now got us in trouble. Of course, we were able to go to court. We had to go to court to get an order of certiorari to quash what the upper area court had delivered, and then we just took off from Makurdi before anybody could even know what was happening, because we were in dangerous territory. But it shows you how there has to be a heightened awareness around cybersecurity and data protection issues for fintechs as well, because if they find themselves in this sort of situations where somebody else has manipulated data and you now process, you can find yourself in quite some trouble at the end of the day. I'd referenced the NDPR, which was set up by NIDA. I mean, the NIDA Act of 2007 gave them powers to be able to issue regulations and laws that would protect data and technology and a couple of other things. So based on that, they issued the NDPR, and NIDA was the supervisory body for NDPR, even though in February 2022, the Nigeria Data Protection Bureau was set up, and in April, they were finally formalized as the Data Protection Agency in Nigeria. So they are now solely responsible for supervising the use and processing of personal data and ensuring that compliance is in place. Let me just move. So what's the NDPR, right? The NDPR is a data protection regulation. It's supported by the implementation framework. So when the NDPR was issued, it was realized that there was some lacuna in it, because I think it was hurriedly done. GDPR had come out, there was a lot of pressure on, let's do something around data protection. And so they issued the NDPR. But by the time folks got to review it, there were some gaps. And so the implementation framework was then issued, which is complementary to the NDPR in itself. So you can read them in conjunction to understand some places where there are lacuna. Some of the legislation that exist as well is the Data Privacy Bill. Again, arguments around the NDPR. I mean, people have also argued that is the NDPR law in itself. I mean, it's subsidiary legislation. So for those of us that are lawyers, we know that it is law, but questions around, can NIDA issue it? Is it comprehensive enough? Don't we need something more? There was a Data Privacy Bill, even though that bill has been walked back. I'm aware that at the moment, the Nigeria Information, NIMC, right? Identity Management, working with NIDA and a couple of other agencies are trying to bring out something that is more comprehensive. So maybe before this government, departs, there may be something more comprehensive than that. But there are other laws, that also affect data privacy, data protection. And I had referenced the Constitution, privacy of citizens, their homes, correspondence, telephone conversation, and telegraphic communication is hereby guaranteed and protected. And for all of us who are lawyers on this, you understand where the Constitution sits as the ground norm. So everything has to bow to it. And where there's inconsistency, you get away because Constitution overrides. Of course, the Cybercrime Prohibition Prevention Act as well provides for data protection and cybersecurity measures that should be taken on computer systems and networks. You have the Freedom of Information Act as well that provides for access to personal data and information. The Child Rights Act protects the right of privacy of children. Section 8 guarantees the child right to privacy subject to a parent or guardian. And Child Rights Act are very crucial, even the GDPR, and to an extent, the NDPR, even though not as comprehensively as the GDPR, countenance the importance of minors not having access to certain data or sensitive data, as it were. You have, let's now start looking a little bit at some of the CBN frameworks that deal with data protection or consumer protection, because fintechs fall under this category. The other ones apply as well because they are wider in their scope. They can also have specific ones. You have the consumer protection framework that prohibits financial institutions like Fintech from disclosing customers' personal information. So you cannot just disclose. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. Even the NDPR provides exceptions to when personal data can be processed without following the legal basis in themselves. But the general principle is that they must first obtain written consent from the consumers before personal data is shared with a third party or used for promotional offers. Again, going back to what I was saying about, even when you're setting up an account, remember when you're trying to do internet banking, mobile banking, giving them your emails for correspondence, you realize that they let you know, okay, do you want to tick to receive by SMS, tick to receive by email, tick for promotional, information. If you tick all of that, then you get what you get. The CBN anti-money laundering AML CFT policy as well also provides for protection of personal data when it deals with persons who may be involved in some of those transactions. CBN also has the risk-based cybersecurity framework and guidelines for deposit money banks and payment service providers. So if you fall under the PSP classification, which a number of these fintechs for PTSPs, PSPs, payment service providers, because some of them are involved in some of the back channels as well as front facing. You have to ensure that you have met the minimum requirements that have been put in place by the CBN cybersecurity guidelines. There are also a couple of other risk management guidelines that are in place. Banking, but last year they had also issued a regulatory framework for open banking in Nigeria. And not to plug my own Hi, Dami, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
I can hear you, David, loud and clear.
Sorry, my data went off. I don't know.
We can hear you and we can see you.
Okay, maybe because I was speaking on data, I don't know, my data went yeah. And I was about to plug one of the articles that we just did, but I know that Fernando Ajayi also did something similar. But Alex, we also recently did something on the draft guidelines that were issued by the CBN on open banking. And I think that's the old open banking space, right? Even the regulatory framework opens up quite a bit on how data sharing is going to take place. And so data protection and data privacy is so crucial now as we move into that open banking phase, because by using application programming interface, APIs for short, banks, financial institutions, fintechs will be able to share data across board without you necessarily needing to go to each of those institutions to set up something. So for instance, if I'm banking with GT and I want to open an account with First Bank, I don't need to go through all of those processes I would typically go through. I'll just tell GT, transfer my information to First Bank, and I'll let First Bank know that my information is being transferred across board, and so with one panel, with just one space, I can probably have my data transferred in about 5 to 6 spaces under the open banking. I mean, that's just one aspect of open banking using APIs, but there's so much more to it as well. So with all of that kind of information moving across board, it's important that data privacy and data protection principles are in place. So let me. Yeah. So the open banking framework applies to, basically a lot of guys, fintechs inclusive. Let me just move. Open banking categorizes, 4 providers: consumers, fintechs, development communities. Let's probably skip some of the things in open banking. This have already referenced it. There's the Credit Reporting Act as well, which deals with certain aspects of personal data. Fintech companies process the personal data of their employees and consumers when effecting transactions on their behalf. So because of that, they're required to comply with provisions of the NDPR. Now, one thing that's important to say about the NDPR, right, is that it applies to a broad spectrum of companies. So hotels, retail companies, banks, fintechs, tech companies, e-commerce platforms, all of them have to comply with the NDPR. And the NDPR classifies, who falls under certain categories, right? A data controller, for instance, is a company. Just think of them as an organization. It can be a person, but think of it in context of fintech now, so they determine the purpose and the manner in which personal data is processed or is to be processed. Now, that word processing has multiple meanings, like I had mentioned earlier. I mean, it covers, altering, deleting, receiving, sending, storing, destruction. So whenever a fintech receives information, say an email, that is processing. So they are processing personal data. When they send market information or they are sending you information around your bank account details, they are processing personal information. When they have to delete that information, maybe the customer has left or has said, I no longer want to bank with you again, destroy all things. When they destroy, that is also processing personal information. So a data controller is responsible for how data is processed and for the purpose that it is being processed. And so has to ensure that whatever they are doing is in line with the NDPR. And then they also mentioned here that some of the obligations that they have is to establish the legal basis for processing any personal information. Now, so I'd mentioned legal basis. I'll probably just spend about 2 minutes there. Under the NDPR, there are 5 legal bases. The GDPR has 6. So those are one of the distinctions, but the NDPR has 5 legal bases. Consent, arguably the most important one, because for most things you're looking for consent. Arguments have been made as to whether consent should even be used for employment purposes because of the disparity in the power. But well, yeah, you can still have consent as certain reasons. Now, consent basically means that you consent for the use of your data for a purpose, but that purpose must be specific and clear and concise. And you don't force people to consent. So you don't pre-tick certain boxes. For instance, if I go to a platform, right, I should be met immediately, or before I can do a lot of things, I should be met with the opportunity to decide whether my data will be processed. So whether it's going to be processed subsequently for marketing purposes, whatever it's going to be, I mean, I should be allowed the purpose to consent to cookies, to consent to the use of my personal information and all of that. It must be very clear, concise. And if I've consented that for a particular purpose, you cannot use it for something else. So even if you have 3 companies that are under a group, if I go to one of those companies and I consent, you cannot now transfer my data to another company under your group and use it for that purpose. Neither can you send me marketing information if I simply attended this webinar, for instance, now, and then somebody has my personal data. The person should not now use that personal data to now be sending me emails that come and buy something. That's breach in itself. So consent must be direct, precise, and must be used for the particular purpose. And we use consent for a lot of things. Another one is the performance of a contract. So when you enter into a contract, for instance, when you go to buy something on Amazon or Jumia, you've actually entered into a contract because there's offer, acceptance, consideration. Now that's a contract in itself. So if Amazon sends me stuff later, or if Amazon has my data, it's because I've entered into a contract with them that allows them to send me stuff subsequently. And so that's one of the legal bases of processing. So legal basis means that you have to make sure that before you process or use personal data, it falls within those 5 categories. So we looked at consent, contract. There's also performance of a legal obligation. And that is where there is a requirement on you, say by a statutory body, or there's a legal obligation on you to process personal data. For instance, pay as you earn. If you're making payments for your employees or for yourself, to the tax authorities, you have to process personal data for that purpose. You can't say, well, I need consent or legal. No, as in legal obligation is imposed on you to do that. If you are remitting pension, for instance, to a PFA for your employees as well, it's a legal obligation. If you are involved in a court suit and somebody's name is there and all of that, there's a legal obligation to be able to put it out there that this is the case that is going on. Another one is where the vital interest of somebody is at stake. And this is probably like where somebody had an accident and needs blood and all of that. You wouldn't start saying, I need consent. I mean, vital interest is at stake. So then you can process data. And the last one is where it is in furtherance of public interest. I'm sure some of us have seen things like when COVID-19 was at its height, and there were a lot of people who would travel and come back and not take their tests, and then the government will now have to publish their passport numbers and their names and say, look, these people are a risk and all of that. They have to do that because it is in furtherance of public interest. So those are the 5 legal bases. And so before fintechs process personal data, they have to make sure that one of these legal bases is being met, because if they don't, then there's a breach. Some of us saw what the FCCPC did when they shut down some of these, guys, loan sharks that are not registered and all of that. Some of them who are even registered, like I think Soko loans or so, there was one of them that had to fine 10 million naira last year because, and I'm sure that some of us have seen this happen, some of our clients or friends, they take loans from these guys, maybe the person defaults, and the next thing you now start getting inundated, they would look for a very embarrassing picture of that person and say, this person is on the run, stole our money. If you see them, person is a thief, don't give them. That is a complete, violation of data protection principles. And how they do that is when you download their mobile app and you consent, they're basically consenting that they can access your system, and so they now go through your system, look for your most called numbers, and then start dishing out this sort of things, look for your pictures and just be embarrassing you. Now, in fact, there's even a breach of data privacy on both sides, both for the person who took the loan, and even for me that I'm receiving that kind of information from you. I have to consent to receive that kind of thing. But let's not go deep, but that's just, why fintechs need to be very careful, because even though somebody has, gone that far of taking a loan from you, doesn't give you the right to now violate their privacy that way. It's illegal and it's unethical on several fronts. Fintechs are supposed to document their data processing activities, display conspicuous privacy notice at every data collection point. I mentioned this, right? When you get onto their platform, you have to get into that space where you are agreeing to the collection of your data for the big data analytics that I referenced earlier. They have to design a data protection compliance system and develop security measures to protect the data collected, and then designate a data protection officer for compliance purposes. These are all opportunities for lawyers, right? Either as in-house, because most times your data protection officer, or DPO for short, is a lawyer. And then lawyers are required to draft these privacy notices, compliance systems. They're required to document data processing activity. I do a number of data audits for clients, and most of them, maybe banks or fintechs, tech companies, they have absolutely no idea sometimes, even though they are tech companies, but being able to appreciate how these things matter to their business is always revealing for them in itself. And again, the lawyer is able to fill that information gap. There's also supposed to be continuous capacity development of the DPOs and other members of staff. So things like training that's supposed to take place periodically, conduct a DPIA, data protection impact assessment, so that it's almost like a check, to be sure that you are healthy enough, and then also identify possible areas where breaches may occur and devise a means of addressing such risks. Seems to run out of time. Carry out audits. One of the things that NIDA did and now been implemented by the Data Protection Bureau is an audit has to be conducted each year for where a fintech processes 2,000 data subjects, personal data within a 12-month period. They're supposed to conduct an audit and have that audit filed with NIDA. But even if you're not processing those many data subjects, there's still an obligation on you to conduct your own data audit. It's a responsible thing to do, right? So that each year you're able to determine your risks and have an external body like your data protection compliance organization carry out sort of like a health check on you, give your recommendations, and then implement them as well. Where there's any breach within 24 hours, you're supposed to report to the data protection bureau, design systems and processes to make data requests and access seamless. And then where there's any error in information, to be able to quickly edit that, outline procedures for informing data subjects of their rights, design systems to enable them easily transfer data. So there's what's called data portability and transferability, so you can actually transfer your data from one place to the other. There's also what is called the right to be, the right to be forgotten, right? So we've seen a couple of people try to implement that, and I've also successfully implemented it, whereby if there's information out there about you, even on the public domain, you can actually seek for a way to have that information deleted online. So these are some of the obligations on fintechs. Have a privacy notice, have an internal data protection framework and policy, have clauses in agreements with third parties that provide for data protection and data privacy. You can also have a data protection agreement. A cookie notice on your platform so that when people go there, they know that they will be tracked. Have a DPIA policy inform record processing activities, have a data subject rectification request form, letter of notification to data subject and data privacy. So where there's a breach, to be able to report to them. CCTV policy, well, yeah, for those who have physical presence, definitely important that you have that so that people will understand. Again, not everybody is going to sit down and read a CCTV policy and say, this is what it says, but so that somebody won't come back and say that they didn't consent to being watched while they were in your premises. Once you go in there, it is deemed that that is consent. And binding corporate rules, intra-group data transfer agreements, where you have a couple of companies under the group in different countries, you can have binding corporate rules that would apply. And thank you for your time. I had to abridge a couple of things, but just so that it's less of a book, explanation, and is able to pass the message across and try to keep it within time too. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Davidson, for a very, very comprehensive overview on the data protection regime, requirement obligations, or compliance requirements of the fintech in Nigeria. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I did warn you that Davidson is very seasoned on this and many matters, and he has done justice to that. I can imagine that there are questions here. I can see your questions all over the place: Netflix, data, online companies. So before we round up, I'm going to hand you over, ladies and gentlemen, to Kofo. Davidson Kofo will assist you with questions, just so that you don't mix them up with the questions that came in the prior session. And Kofo, please, can you run us through some of the questions? We have about 9 minutes, so let's take as many as we can in time before we round up the session. Thank you.
Yes, all right. At the moment, you have about 12 questions. And first, as regards streaming services like Netflix, I believe algorithm is the reason we see similar videos to the ones we watch. Or is algorithm another way data is being monitored? So someone wants to know if algorithm is another way data is being monitored.
Yeah, so you use algorithms around the whole big data analytics, right? So think of algorithms is all part of that subsets, right? Because when you're using algorithms now, you're trying to predict patterns. That's all part of how data analytics work, So they're using the algorithms to determine, okay, what's going to happen next, or what is this person thinking? What is this person's viewing pattern? So the algorithms and everything is all part of the big data analytics, thing. So yeah, sort of, it's part of it. YouTube as well, they use it. You watch a lovely YouTube video today, and then you now just start seeing your preferences showing up. So it's all part of the algorithms, which is inside the big data analytics space.
Okay. And someone wants to know if a phone number by itself is a personal data.
Yes, phone number. You see, so personal data is anything that can be used to directly or indirectly identify you. If you have my phone number, that's personal data because it can be used to identify me one way or the other. So yes, my picture is personal data. And a lot of people just go online and just crop things. But again, there are so many sites to it, right? If you go to Instagram and you carry my picture and you start displaying it, what are the terms and conditions, that go with Instagram, for instance? Does it allow you to do that? And you signed up for that. So, but picture is personal data, video is personal data. Even what we're doing now is personal data. Will I go as far as saying that my voice is personal data? But you get the picture.
Thank you. Someone wants to know if only one legal basis needs to be fulfilled before a company, someone says fintech, but before data is processed, or if all 5 legal bases must be met.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so just one legal basis is required. If you have consent, it's fine. But like I said, if it's consent, because consent is what a lot of people will say, oh, he consented, but it must be definite. So I can't consent for the use of something, then something else is what is used, but it must be one of the legal bases is fine. You don't need to satisfy all 5.
Okay. And someone wants to know if the fair information practice principles present in the GDPR and DPA and other data protection regulations across the world are also applicable in Nigeria.
Yes, they're applicable in Nigeria.
Thanks. Someone wants to know if a data controller is the same as a data processor. And
okay, well, no. So so a data controller can be a data processor at the same time, but not all data processors will be data controllers. And so a data processor acts on the instructions of a data controller most times. So the data controller will direct the data processor to process data on its behalf. An example is MasterCard. MasterCard, or most of the card schemes, will classify as data processors because they are processing. Remember what I said about data controllers, right? They determine the purpose for which processing takes place. So they have determined that, okay, this processing is taking place now. The retail store has determined that this process is taking place now because this person wants to buy something from the store. But the data processor now processes the data controller based on the directive of the data controller. So you're processing. But a data controller may then find itself serving as both a controller and processor where its activities are such that, would deal with both processing and controlling. So they determine the use of the data, but they also have to process it for that purpose.
Thank you. Someone says that one of the legal bases for processing personal data under the GDPR is legitimate interest. However, legitimate interest is not a basis for processing personal data under the NBPR. Is this a shortcoming on the part of NBPR?
Yes, it is a shortcoming on the part of the NBPR. But it is, because I've had clients who use legitimate interest, especially for employment purposes sometimes, and they're very serious about it because maybe they're international companies who are already operating with the GDPR. And then the NDPR is here, but this is their local subsidiary, but they're using the legitimate interest. So being able to categorize, those class of services they've been providing under the NDPR sometimes is a bit tough. And some people just decide to just put legitimate interest regardless. But yes, it's a shortcoming. I didn't want to just keep it simple by saying yes. But yes, it
Understood. So someone says that what is the best procedure for enforcing inter-country or continent data breach?
Wow. Okay, that's an interesting one. I would say where that happens, of course, you have an obligation to report to your supervisory authority, which in this case is the Data Protection Bureau. You can notify them that it is an intercontinental or inter-country breach that has taken place, so that they can do the needful. You can also choose to notify the supervisory authority in the other country where this breach has taken place as well, so that they are aware of it and can take any remediation efforts that need to be put in place. But that's an interesting one because I've never really thought about how that would play out.
Someone wants to know which is superior, the NDPR or the GDPR.
Well, yeah, very, very. So when the person says superior now, do they mean in Nigeria? Because the NDPR applies to all Nigerians, and then foreigners that reside in Nigeria. So wherever you are as a Nigerian, it applies to you. So it depends on where you find yourself in terms of the superiority. Is the GDPR I mean, the GDPR probably has a stronger legal backing for its own purpose, but the NDPR by all means applies to you as a Nigerian. So you have to comply with the NDPR.
Okay. She clarified by saying in Nigeria. I believe you've done justice to that. So I think you just take one more question. Sorry. I'm trying to see through the questions. So how does a company go about obtaining approval for the transfer of personal data to another entity abroad? Is approval needed if a legal basis for processing the data exists?
Okay, so what the NDPR provides for is there's what are called whitelist countries. Right? So whitelist countries are countries that are considered to have the right type of data processes and laws in place. So for instance, all GDPR countries are whitelist countries. Countries that are signatory to the Malibu Convention, African countries signatory to the Malibu Convention are whitelist countries. The United States, Hong Kong, there are a couple of countries that have been listed as whitelist countries. So where that country falls under the whitelist, then the legal basis will suffice. That legal basis will suffice for whitelist countries. Now, where it doesn't fall within the whitelist countries, if you have that mentioned something which are called binding corporate rules. So, for instance, if I have maybe our company is in Nigeria, the other one is in Uzbekistan, which doesn't fall under the whitelist. Where we have binding corporate rules, which basically provides for data privacy and data protection principles within our group, then I will take those binding corporate rules or standard contracting clauses to the Data Protection Bureau for their approval. If they approve the binding corporate rules or the standard contracting clauses, then on that basis, I can then transfer data to Uzbekistan because they are using those binding corporate rules which have been created for the group. So I've created two scenarios now where you fall under the whitelist countries and where you fall under the binding corporate. If you don't fall under any one of those ones, then you need approval from the Attorney General of the Federation, but he has ceded that power to NIDA, which by the carving out of the Data Protection Bureau is now the Data Protection Bureau. So you will require approval from NIDA/Data Protection Bureau before you can transfer personal data out of jurisdiction if it doesn't fall under the whitelist countries or their binding corporate rules and standard contracting clauses.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all the questions we can accommodate in this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kofo.
Thank you very much, Kofo. Thank you very much, Davidson. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It has been a very impactful 3 days where we started looking at fintech, all aspects of fintech, starting from an international perspective with our friends from Nba-Icle and Emory, and then we came into Nigeria and we looked at the fintech landscape generally. We looked at the key regulators in the fintech ecosystem. We then started today by looking at the key participants in the fintech ecosystem, and then we rounded off with a very, very helpful session on data protection. I want to take this opportunity to thank every facilitator and the participating firms, Nba-Icle and Emory, Alex Legal Practitioners, TNP, and Olaniwo Ajayi. We want to thank our sponsors, the Nigeria LNG Limited, of course, and to thank the NBA Institute of Continuing Legal Education for making this possible. We want to thank all our participants. You've been very patient, all 900 plus of you from the very first day to all 470 something of us who are still online today. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your questions and participating. Thank you very, very much. We hope that it's been very helpful and enlightening sessions. Through the Nba-Icle, we'll find a way to share the course content that has been delivered over the last 3 days with all participants. We want to thank you all very much for participating, and we thank you because you will heed the call next time we have another session queued up. Thank you to everyone. Please keep the questions coming in, keep the messages coming in, and we'll do our best to provide responses, answers, and to share the material and content with you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. and do have a good rest of the day. Thank you all. Thank you all. Bye-bye.